Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're talking about the new DC film, Wonder Woman 1984. Before we begin, let me know in the comments if you were looking forward to this or what your thoughts were if you've seen it already. And make sure to give this a thumbs up if you like these reviews because it helps me out immensely if you do that. Also, if you're new here and you like movies, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases and some classics. But now, let's jump right into it. This stars Gal Gadot once again as Diana Prince, now working as an anthropologist in 1984 Washington, D.C., while secretly fighting crime as Wonder Woman. And with the help of her resurrected boyfriend Steve Trevor, played by Chris Pine, she faces two new challenges. Her friend-turned-enemy Barbara, played by Kristen Wiig, who attains superpowers of her own, along with businessman Maxwell Lord, played by Pedro Pascal, who takes on the powers of the Dreamstone, which grants the wish of anyone who uses it. The first Wonder Woman was a much-needed bright spot in the early days of the DCEU, which got off to a pretty shaky start to say the least. So, of course, getting a sequel to this much quicker than some of DC's other efforts was to be expected. And with the return of the director of the first film, Patty Jenkins, it seems like lightning should have struck twice. Though, unfortunately, that just wasn't the case here. Now, this isn't a bad movie, I like to make that perfectly clear, though I did find it underwhelming. But let's start with some positives. I thought the cast all did a great job. The new additions especially were very enjoyable. I thought Kristen Wiig was great as Barbara. I liked the arc that she had as someone who just wanted to be recognized by others as she's lived most of her life ignored or forgotten. And I thought she effectively conveyed the desire of someone who just wants their time to shine. Her early scenes before transforming into Cheetah were really well done, and you can definitely find her sympathetic early on as you can get a sense of where she's coming from. And Pedro Pascal was also very good as Maxwell Lord. Something he's shown that he can be very good at is giving off this campy, over-the-top sort of energy, and I thought he did a fine job of bringing that same energy to this film. It's worth noting that this film in general was heavily inspired by the Richard Donner Superman movies in terms of the tone it was trying to convey, and that's especially seen through Pascal's performance. Patty Jenkins even notes how he was inspired partially by Gene Hackman's portrayal of Lex Luthor in those films, and I definitely got a lot of those vibes. He tries to be a little funny and charming, and before he even gains any powers, he can talk his way out of any situation. So he'd be fun to watch, again, especially in the earlier scenes. And I'd say the first half of this film especially had the film's stronger moments. During this section, I liked how it tried leaning in a bit into that cheesier, campier tone of the 80s. I liked how it tried having some fun, especially with how some of the action scenes played out. One of my favorite moments in particular was early on when Wonder Woman is stopping a heist going on inside of a mall. And while I wouldn't call the first half incredible, I did like the foundation it was laying, and it looked like it was setting the stage for what a sequel should be doing, which is going bigger and bolder. And while it attempts to take on so much, it unfortunately ends up being to a fault. The best word to describe this movie is hollow. While the first Wonder Woman is far from one of the deepest films around, I liked how you had this very optimistic protagonist in this fish out of water scenario, and she's in this totally new environment during this bleak part of history, yet she tries bringing that sense of hope to that time, and it gives the film a great feel, along with some solid emotional moments. But I rarely got that sense with this film. There's definitely an overall theme of be careful what you wish for and how our desires of wanting more can have terrible consequences in the vein of the monkey's paw story. But it rarely tapped so much into that to give us moments where we can connect with the characters. Like Maxwell Lord, outside of Pascal's performance, isn't all that interesting of a villain. He gains the powers of the stone to pretty much do whatever he wants, but he simply becomes this wish fulfillment machine for the entire movie. And that's about the full extent of what makes him interesting. There's not much nuance to his character. He grants wishes to people, he leaves destruction in his wake, and repeat. That's about it. It touches somewhat upon the relationship with his son, who visits him every so often throughout the movie, and it implies they have a somewhat strained relationship, as he sometimes seems to visit at the most inopportune times, and it tends to anger him at times, but it did little to really humanize Lord. It only sporadically dives deeper into these moments. The depth that should have been there just wasn't there, and even though he's the main villain, he felt more like a plot device than a fully fleshed out character. He did what the story needed him to do, and little else was done to make him all that memorable. He felt very surface level. I actually didn't even fully realize he was in the movie because the trailers advertised Cheetah more than him. He was just so extremely underwhelming outside of Pascal's performance. And let's talk about Cheetah as well. She completely went to waste. I think she had the more interesting arc between her and Lord, but after that first act, she felt so sidelined for much of the movie, and the two scenes you see of her fighting Wonder Woman in the trailer are literally the only times they actually fight in the movie, or you see her in action at all. And those are well into the movie after a stretch of barely even seeing her. Now, I get they were trying to show how Barbara's jealousy of Diana and her desire to be recognized grows more and more, and it leads to the worst qualities in her being brought out, but when you leave her off to the side as often as the movie did and just bring her back for only two really major moments, it lacks the punch that it should have had. If anything, the roles of her and Maxwell Lord should have been reversed, as the trailers themselves led us to believe. She should have been more of the primary villain, and Maxwell Lord should have been the secondary villain, and it's instead all this time spent on a guy who doesn't have any sort of emotional complexity while it squanders what could have been a very nuanced antagonist. And because of that, it causes this film to feel very long. I mean, this movie drags for about a half hour or so more than it needed to be, clocking in at a very bloated 2.5 hours. I found some moments to be a bit repetitive, and it tries focusing on spectacle more with a lot of these big visual effects, especially as it's showing off the extent of Lord's powers. Now, and it does lead to some entertaining moments. The action scenes are one of the more enjoyable parts of this movie, and this film does try to go as big as possible with some of them. But without some of the heart and emotion driving them, I always didn't feel the stakes at times, mainly because I didn't care about these characters as much as the film wanted me to. Even the stuff with Steve Trevor didn't completely work for me. I mean, Chris Pine's was great, don't get me wrong there, and the idea behind this arc was to show how Diana needed to let go of her past and be able to move on, and there were some decent moments between the two, but it felt more like he was just there rather than being a fully fleshed out character in his own right. He was someone who was there more to fuel Diana's own arc rather than to have anything meaningful of his own. So similar to Maxwell Lord, he felt more like an object than anything, and that's especially the way in which he returns. Now, I wouldn't consider this a spoiler since it's early on and we know he's in the movie to begin with, but the way he comes back is his soul is placed in another man's body due to the powers of this Dreamstone. And even though we, the audience, will see Chris Pine interacting with Wonder Woman, in actuality, she's really just interacting with this random stranger who's hosting Steve Trevor's soul, which is a bit weird when you think about it, especially as they continue a romantic relationship this way. And given that the powers of this stone can do a lot here, I'm not sure why it couldn't just bring him back in his own body. They try to make it okay for the audience by showing Chris Pine the entire time, but it's a lot stranger when you put it in perspective, to be honest. This honestly isn't a bad movie, but it is disappointing, especially given how good the first Wonder Woman was. It tries to do so much, but by doing so, it leads to characters who aren't totally fleshed out, along with others who are underused, and an overall lack of the depth that was present in the first film. And because there's not as much emotion, it just makes that 2.5 hours drag at times. The performances were great, the action scenes were entertaining, and the film did try to go for a sense of fun, which at times worked, but not consistently. It's watchable enough, but it could have been so much better. Wonder Woman 1984 gets a 6.5 out of 10. I'd put this towards the bottom tier of the DCEU films. I gotta watch them all again. I can definitely say of the two movies from this universe that we got this year, Birds of Prey was easily the better of the two. I'll eventually do a ranking video for all of them, but I'll tell you as of now, this is towards the bottom. Oh well. But let me know, did you see Wonder Woman 1984, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like it more than the first movie, less than the first movie, and what's your favorite DCEU film? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll catch you next time.